Hello, thank you very much for watching this talk. I'm Yuan, a senior language lecturer in Global Cultures and Languages Hub. I'm also currently serving as a deputy head for Academic Literacy Center in Xi'an, Jiaotong-Liverpool University. Joining me today is my colleague Stephen Bateman. Stephen is currently a principal language lecturer. Stephen also has been undertaking various senior roles in English Language Center. We are very glad to present the talk EAP in Transition, how we can build the crucial competence to equip our students for the changing world. So the outline will be, I will start with a background on our Year 1 and Year 2 EAP provision, and then move on to strategies for how to develop students' academic literacy. And then Stephen will touch on the transition process and also conceptualizing the disciplinary difference, and finish with a reflection. Right, so before 2025, English Language Center, we offer to Year 1 and Year 2 students with a year-long EAP module. Year 1 is mainly served as a foundation year with students mixed from a mixed discipline backgrounds, and the topic we use in class vary from business, biology to engineering. And the assessment are largely focused on the linguistic competence. Once a student equipped with a B2 exit level, and they will enter the Year 2 EAP provision, which aim to elevate students' English proficiency to B2+, and the students are grouped by their degree programs with a topic that is linked to their discipline. And the learning outcomes assessed can be kind of transferred to their degree programs. But our world is keep changing. And as a language teacher, we can't help asking, can language teaching offer more to our students? Facing a world filled with uncertainty, ambiguity, complexity, changeability, scarcity, an emerging aim in global higher education is to produce graduates who are not just knowledgeable in their field, but also culturally and academically agile. They should be able to diagnose the norm and expectations of a new academic environment, to adapt their learning and communication strategy to meet different expectations effectively, can critically evaluate the strengths and the limitations of different academic cultures, also integrate and synthesize perspectives from diverse cultures and traditions. So this requires a moving from beyond just simply orientation to university students to a more embedded, scaffolded, and a reflective support that fosters students' intercultural academic competence. So from summer 2025, the Academic Literacy Center, ALC, was established following the School of Languages review in academic year 24-25 as a replacement of the Year 2 EAP modules. The ALC objectives include providing embedded and ad hoc educational support in language and academic skills to all academic departments, and integrating educationally valuable forms of AI into students' learning, providing a bespoke support service to enhance students' attainment. The ALC is split into 12 teams, 10 teams which mirror the 10 schools academy at XGTLU, and 2 teams which work with all the PG students on an overarching basis. First, still, it's crucial to define what we mean by academic literacy. It is far more than reading and writing. It is more about the ability to understand and produce complex texts, include textbooks, research articles, essays, reports, and navigate different genres. Knowing how to write a reflective report is different from writing an argumentative essay. Think critically, evaluating sources, constructing arguments, identify biases, and question assumptions. And the ability to use academic language, mastering the specific vocab, grammar, and discourse patterns for a particular discipline. And also participate in academic discourse, understanding how knowledge is created, how it is debated, and communicated within a community of scholars. So the traditional EAP class often focus on the language as a subject of study, but to build academic literacy, we can see a core pedagogical shift from teaching EAP as a single module with learning outcome independent of the discipline requirements to seeing language as a tool for learning and thinking. This is a move from learning about language to learning through the language. And here are some key strategies we've been reflecting on for developing students' academic literacy through language teaching. So the first is deconstruct advanced academic genre. This is probably the most powerful approach, involve explicitly teaching students different genres they will encounter in academia, such as research articles, literature reviews, or conference posters. Language teaching must make the hidden rule of these texts visible for the students. So we can use authentic suggested reading texts from the course, deconstruct the model, analyze not just the content, but the rhetorical moves. We could ask student question about how do author establish the research gap in the introduction? How do they use citation to position themselves within a scholarly conversation? How do they use a hedging language to discuss findings without overstating them? We'll be also giving students a poor and good example of an abstract. Have them use a rubric that could be something teacher and student co-create together in class to justify which is better, building their evaluative skills. So the teacher's role is no longer a sole judge, but more like a guide who demystifies the features of the successful academic texts. The second would be explicit instruction of academic vocabulary and syntax. You can't expect students to absorb the complex language implicitly, teach it directly, with a focus on Tier 2 vocabulary, that high utility words that appear across other disciplines, especially we are at an era that interdisciplinary research is a way forward. And Tier 3, a lower frequent subject-specific jargon. For example, I'm working with translation and interpreting students this semester, teach them what is intralingual translation, interlingual translation, intersemiotic translation, etc. And we could also teach how to identify stance by focus on how the language creates an authoritative voice through using hedging, boosters, and attitude markers. The third is fostering critical thinking and metacognition. Academic literacy is inseparable from critical thinking. Language teaching must create opportunities for students to engage deeply with the texts. The university students often struggle with writing because they haven't learned to read like writers. The language teaching could bridge these skills. So when questioning the text, instead of quiz on the content, we could ask about where does the author address a counter-argument? What evidence do they use to support it? Whose voice is missing from this text? And having students write a brief reflection on their own learning process is a good idea. So what was the most challenging part of reading this article? What strategy did I use to understand it? That sort of things. The fourth part is integrate language and content. So academic literacy is best developed when the language is taught in the context of a meaningful way. This is the principle behind the approach like content and language integrated learning or the CBI, content-based instructions. So move away from standalone English course. We provide a more embedded support. An integrated model where a language workshop is directly linked to a content course. For example, a writing for translation tutorial might just run alongside introduction to translation lecture. Or sometimes the language and the subject lecturers could co-teach in the lecture to make the content more meaningful and richer for the students. So from language to academic literacy, the adaptation is a shared responsibility. So the institution must provide explicit, structured support while students engage in active, reflective learning. The language teacher's role also transformed from instructor of rules to more like a guide and analyst of the academic discourse. So by using these strategies, teachers can demystify often the invisible rules of academic success. They empower students not just to speak, write correctly, but to think, to argue, and participate fully in the academic world. The goal is to help students become more independent, critical and confident members of their academic communities. Okay, that's my part. Over to you, Stephen.
So thank you very much, Yuan, for delivering the first part of this presentation. I'd like to move on now to just give a little bit more context surrounding the ALC and the initiatives that Yuan has been talking about, and then we'll have a brief look at some relevant theory which may help to inform future change, future directions for embedded EAP support. So what Yuan has been describing is related to our Academic Literacy Center. And at our university, XJTLU, we actually have a 4-year degree program. It's a degree which is accredited by both Liverpool and the Chinese Ministry of Education. But the Liverpool accredited modules only really begin in year 2, so that leaves us the first year in which to get students up to speed, to go through part of that transition process. However, many of our students do not commit to a specific program until towards the middle of the second semester of year 1. So that means that the kind of embedded and subject-specific support that Yuan has been talking about can't really begin until year 2. So when students are in year 1, they still fall under the ELC, the English Language Center, and we kind of tend to continue with a more generic EAP approach, as you might expect, to try to give students a broader foundation, whilst also, of course, bringing up their English proficiency so that they can engage in a more meaningful way as they progress onto their programs. So I would see this as being a key element of the transition process. We know that transition support can be very vital for students. There are several studies which show this, and we know that if students are not sufficiently supported through transition, there can be some negative outcomes. Of course, we want to avoid that where possible. We want to support our students to adapt to our learning environment, our academic practices, so that students can actually meaningfully progress on their learning journey. So here, because we have this generic year 1 stage, then during that process, during that time, we can only really focus on helping students adapt to the broader practices of Anglophone higher education. So this includes stuff like respecting academic integrity. It includes certain work on supporting various genres, writing proposals, writing essays, etc. Students get a lot of EAP contact hours in year 1. However, as I mentioned earlier, they can't yet really specialize in terms of their subject practices. So this transition to disciplinary practice really happens in year 2, and that's through all of those interesting methods that Yuan has talked about. So there are several common challenges which we encounter. This is actually just drawing on a project I was involved with over the past few years, which is looking at some of the challenges for our domestic students, because they're coming into a setting where there's a lot of group work needed, where we tend to promote collaborative learning, for example. However, students who've come through the domestic Gaokao route, well, they've gone through a high school which is very much predicated on individual achievement. So actually giving some scaffolded support to help them work in groups, and we can do this both in a hands-on way through practical group work, but also by giving them some of the various theories, looking at team role theories, looking at group dynamics, so that they know what to expect. This has been quite successful, and equipping students with these kind of foundational soft skills really has, I think, helped to support them transition into year 2, where we can then build on that and develop the skills in a more subject-orientated way. So I would view this really as a process of situated learning. I think we're seeing students who are moving from a periphery towards the center in a way. They start off outside of their discipline really in year 1, but they move towards that as they make their program choice. And then in year 2, through the both the work in their subject modules and also the work which Yuan has been talking about. Students are able to develop their literacy in their particular discipline and therefore move towards that center to be able to actually progress on their learning journey. Now, this, of course, is a very beneficial process for the student, but it does raise some difficulties for us as EAP teachers, because if we are supporting other disciplines and we're doing so in an embedded way where we are potentially having to engage with content teaching, then it means that we need to begin to specialize, we need to transform our outlook. And we need to move beyond some of our kind of calcified practices. EAP is not necessarily just one set of behaviors. EAP now is going to have to involve understanding the norms of the subjects which we are specializing in. So it can help to think a little bit about what are the differences between disciplines? How can we conceptualize them? How can we try to understand those different worldviews that we may encounter? Well, I would draw here on work by people like Paul Trowler looking at academic tribes and territories, because we may note that although, yes, we're all here, we're all working, learning, researching, we're all trying to learn more about the world, actually our focus is very different depending on our disciplines. Some disciplines are much more rooted in maybe a very hard realist ontology. Some, like humanities, which my background is in, is much more relativist. And so therefore, how we understand the world, how we interpret the world, and is going to change. And that difference in viewpoint also underscores some of the methodological differences that we encounter as well. Now, of course, these are not absolute. There's always variety, there's always diversity within disciplines, but we can identify general trends. And I think one broad way to look at it is to think that, yes, different disciplines, they tend to have epistemic dimension. So what is their particular theory of knowledge? And also their social practice dimensions. And this touches on a little bit about what Yuan was saying earlier, about genre conventions and about things like subject-specific jargon, because yes, different disciplines, they have their own argot, they have their own terminology. And very often when you move across disciplines, you find different words are used to describe the same phenomenon, and we need to be using the one which is appropriate for the particular setting that our students are in. So that's why this discipline specific work is very vital, and why it's very important to keep this conversation open with the departments and to work closely with the academic staff that we support in those other schools. So yeah, just as Yuan was talking about the transformation of the teacher's role, we are in a state of transition. We do need to move between disciplines. So that dialogue is essential, as is a need to look a little bit outside the box, not just rely on our own preconceptions, but to understand the dominant worldview and practices of the particular disciplines that we have been assigned to support. So this is necessary because, in the past I've seen attempts at specialization, but it's been just kind of set dressing, okay, we're supporting science students, so we'll have a few readings on science, but we weren't really supporting students in the scientific method, in the kinds of critical thinking that were needed to be successful. So we need to go a little bit deeper than that. So to sum up, EAP support functions as a vital element of student transition. We did in the past do quite well with supporting transition to the broader university, but we often struggled with supporting students as they progressed on to their specific subject majors. So now with the new initiatives from the ALC, we are able to tailor that support so much better and to include input from departmental staff. And that is starting to show benefits already. It's likely that this is going to be a much more effective approach. However, we do need to remain aware that there are often barriers which can exist. We do have cultural differences between disciplinary clusters. Each discipline has its own particular practices, its own particular values, and it can be sometimes challenging to move between that. So as EAP practitioners, I think we need to recognize the need to embrace different worldviews. We need to remain open-minded. So ultimately, this kind of innovative EAP provision can be an essential catalyst. It can help to drive achievement across the university. As Yuan said, this is a new initiative. It's only been running for this year, but it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out in future. Okay, thank you all very much. That's the end of my talk today, and we'll leave it there. So thank you all, and bye-bye for now.